I'm Kevin. Welcome to the Claremont Classic Garage. You never know what you're going to find us doing around here or what we're going to have to show you. Today's no exception, let me tell you. On a side note, it's the 4th of May, and after the really nice day we had yesterday, it's kind of turned back into winter again, and they say we're going to get snow by the end of the week. Super duper. So much for that. Anyway, let's get on with today's show. You're looking at a 1986 Holiday Rambler 24-foot Class C RV. Its model designation from Holiday Rambler is a 24 SB. SB for side bath. They also had a 24 RB, you guessed it, rear bath. Anyway, it's a E350 chassis with a 460 engine. This unit, it's kind of shaggy looking on the outside because it's been sitting outside in the sun its whole life, but it is from Arizona. It's only got 36,000 miles on it since new, and she's a real dream. Let's go check it out, shall we? Not much to see here. It's a great big 460 cubic inch V8 engine. It's got a Holley carburetor on it. I've tweaked on it a little bit. We'll talk about all that stuff when I get inside. It's bloody cold out here. Some of the things we did on the outside was I changed the mirrors to swingaways. It had more West Coast style mirrors on it. They were painted. They were all rusty, so I got these stainless steel swingaways. I put them on. It's got a set of cheap stainless steel simulators on the wheels. It has its original wheels, but we changed the tires. These originally had, I think they were 215/85/16 or something. They were horrible things. The thing went all over the road. But it's got 225/75/16 E-rated 10-ply tires on it. That's what they use on newer Ford dually cube vans, so I threw them on here. And along with some other modifications we made, this thing drives way better. It's got a nice exhaust. I'll tell you about that after. Here you can see the exhaust pipe for the generator. The generator that was in it when we got it was a, what kind was it? A Kohler. It was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. So we got rid of it. And in its place, I got this little Champion. It's not really an RV generator in that it doesn't have an electric start and stuff like that. It's not like an Onan that's made to be built into an RV. But we modified it. It runs off the RV fuel tanks now. It doesn't have its own fuel tank. I added an RV plug so I can plug the camper into it. You can see a couple of switches I put on here. It's got an electric fuel pump, and I've got a selector valve there I can draw from either of the chassis fuel tanks. And it's got underneath a cooling fan so that it pulls fuel through this grate in the door, or air, pardon me, pulls air through the grate in the drawer, pulls it down below to keep this thing running nice and cool. And you know what? So far, so good. Then I made a couple of tracks on top of it to where the fuel tank used to be to store my barbecue, and a couple of wooden blocks, and the adapter for the poo-poo pipe. But it's that. It's got a pretty nice awning. Let me lock this up here. There we go. The third brake light I added, it's from a Jeep TJ. It's rigged up for heavy towing. We pull the race car all over the place with it. This back bumper is really neat. It's got this storage, not the usual square tube that these things have. So we reinforced that. It's kind of all integral with the trailer hitch, and we put a couple of leveling jacks underneath it there. There's the tube for the sewage pipe, water hookups, water heater, 2 fuel tanks. You can see up on top there, it's got a cyclone vent for the sewage vent stack. A must on any RV. It's the best $20 you'll ever spend. It just gets rid of the smell. Coach batteries are in there. There's 2 of them. There's the black water tank, and the gray valve is at the back there. We had some goodies on the front, a bug deflector, big aftermarket, bug guards, tow hooks, fog lights. I put a chin spoiler under it to make it look racy. So here we're in the cab. These were ordered as just they call it a cutaway. Some Class C RVs you'll see have the Ford seats in them still. This one doesn't. It's got some flex steel RV seats. They're actually pretty comfortable. The only thing I don't like about them is they don't recline. But anyway, I'm used to old cars with seats that don't recline. So above the cab, you've got a really nice sized bunk. This is where the wife and me sleep, because the dog is taking over the actual bed at the back. Unless you want to share it with her. So, we'll get in here. It's got tilt steering. It's got dealer installed air conditioning that of course doesn't work. Look at how beautiful that dash is. What are we at? 36,575 miles. That is since new. Beautiful. It didn't have intermittent wipers, but I found out on a Ford it is so easy to add, so we did that with just parts from the wreckers. The sound system in it, it's just a Sony head unit. I've got it hooked up to the house battery so I can listen to it all the time. I've got this switch on the back here. So how I've got the sound system set up, there's two 6x9 speakers here and there, and then I've got a couple of 5.5s in the doors and a couple more at the very back. So when I'm driving, the 6x9s are always on. When I'm driving, the switch is up, I get the door speakers working. When we're parked, switch it down, and the 6x9s still work, but it sends the signal from the front speakers all the way to the back. Over here I've got a voltmeter that's switchable between, so right now it's monitoring the coach batteries. I can go there and monitor the chassis battery, but it won't work unless the ignition's on. Turn that off. It's got an off position in the middle. Here's the switches for my lights on the back. There's our call sign, Holiday Rambler. It's got a nice Cobra CB with the weather bands. I've got a big Garmin RV navigation system. Got my XM satellite radio. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this thing, eh? Here we've got a side dinette. Oh, the sun's really glaring in. That converts into a bed. She sleeps 6. Original air conditioner, it still works, and it's got the optional heat coil in it. So today it was cold. I was out here, I just put that on rather than turn the furnace on. And it warmed it up quite nicely in here. It's got a TV antenna. Well, when we got it, the fridge wouldn't work. So luckily in those days you could still buy basically the same fridge. So we replaced the fridge. This one works great. But I'll tell you what, the new fridge wasn't anywhere near as nice as the old fridge. Most of the racks and stuff that you see inside are from the old fridge because they really cheaped out on the new one. Now back here is the rear dinette, which also converts into a bed. Underneath here in the center is the water tank. On this side, it's mostly taken up by the generator compartment. I've got a 3,000 watt inverter right here. And in that back corner, I've got a pretty hefty compressor, an air compressor. Just the head of it, it's got a big air tank underneath. That one is hooked up to the generator and only runs when the generator is on. So if we're at the racetrack or something, we need air for the, blowing up tires and running air tools and stuff. I'll run that. It's got storage like this on either side. This one I keep the TV in. They hadn't invented flat screen TVs yet when this camper was made, but it's like they had a premonition. You know, my flat screen TV, my DVD player, everything all fits in there perfectly. And on this side is my tire covers, my windshield cover, and the little tent thing for the awning. Back here in this corner is the water pump, the hot water heater, and right in this corner I've got another very small little compressor that is just dedicated solely for the air suspension, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Here we got a double sink. There's so much storage in this. You notice how much storage there is? Look at that. Isn't it amazing? My wife, when she saw the storage in this, she went crazy. I'll tell you when I'm done the tour, I'll tell you the story of how we ended up with this thing. It's kind of bizarre. The microwave, the original microwave was huge. It filled this whole opening, and it was the old one with the chrome knob. If any of you remember that, you turn the chrome knob. When you turned it on, half the grid in the town would probably go dark. Oh well. Anyway, we swapped it out for this one. Here's the stove. So it's got a four burner range with the oven below. Beautiful. Under here, I think it's just the wheel well. Yeah, and the AC fuse panel. The DC fuse panel, I think, is in here. No, maybe it's in this cupboard. I don't know, it's in here somewhere. Not really important. The bathroom, it's really small, but it's quite nice. Again, it's got lots of storage in it. It's got a shower in it. The shower base was all cracked and messed up, but we sent it out to a place that actually manufactures them, and they have a refurbished service. It was not cheap, but they made it like new, and we can actually use it again now. So that's great. The carpet is a little rough in spots, but it's original, and I don't really have any huge plans to swap it out. Here, as part of the onboard air system, don't ask me why I decided to do this, but this is the control valve, and everything for the compressor ended up getting mounted over here. So I've got a couple of air outlets in here if I ever decide I need them. The two gauges. One is the tank pressure. The other one is what the regulator is set at. It's all shut down right now, so that's the mechanic in me that does stuff like that. Tons of storage. Storage everywhere in this. It's fantastic. You don't see too many of these Class C holiday Ramblers around. So a bunch of years ago, the wife and me decided that we wanted to go RVing. Her mom and dad had always been avid RVers, and we decided, after going with them a lot of times, that we wanted to do our own thing. So, we came up with a budget and went out looking at RVs, and all we found was junk. Absolute crap. Old ex-rentals. I mean, I looked at one, it was an ex-rental. Of the 6 tires on it, there wasn't 2 the same. That's the kind of stuff I was finding, and I just wasn't impressed with it. So I said to her, I said, well, we're going to do what we do best. We're going to find a fixer-upper. So we looked around, and we looked around, and we looked around, and we looked around, and we looked around. We went and looked at all kinds of them. Most of them had, you know, lived rough lives. I kind of decided if I was getting an old one, I wanted one. It had to be a Ford. Being a Mopar guy, that's kind of not what most people expected, but the Ford is the only one that's body on chassis. And my plan was that I wanted to be able to do heavy towing with this, so I needed something with a frame. The Dodge and Ford class, or Dodge and Chevy Class C's, they're built on a unitized platform, and the frame, usually the actual factory frame, and them usually ends like 6 or 8 feet from the back bumper, and that's no good for big towing. And I might not have thought about that. Thank God my father-in-law, the RV guru, knew, and he said, get a Ford, it's got a full frame. So that's how this is. I mean, the factory frame ends probably 4 feet behind the back wheels, and then they extended the actual frame with C-channels. So the frame literally goes from the front bumper to the back bumper. And it's got that, you saw that big whoop-ass hitch on the back of it. This thing will pull anything. So with that in mind, we were out looking at Fords. And, oh man, some of them were so bad. Most of them, they spend their life sitting around in campgrounds. Even worse, people sit them in their yards. And the worst thing you can do with any vehicle is sit it on grass or dirt. The moisture comes up out of the ground and it just destroys them. Every single one that we looked at, the belly pans were all rotted out of them. The frames were all crusty. Brake lines, gas lines, fuel tanks, exhaust, everything everything you touched under there, all crap was raining down on you. It was terrible. So I answered a want ad. Was about an hour away from home. We went and looked at this one. Holiday Rambler. What is that? I didn't know what a Holiday Rambler is. But we went and we looked at it. And it looked decent. I mean, you could tell it had been sitting in this guy's driveway for a very, very long time. But it had good bones, you could tell. I got on the creeper, went underneath it, and I go, man, this thing is spotless underneath. Like clean, clean, clean. I said, this thing is from the south. It has to be. There's no way it's from here. Then I get looking around up inside, and I saw on the windshield, there's a sticker, an oil change sticker from Glendale, Arizona, and it says next service due 34,280 miles. And I looked at the odometer, and it was at 35,000 and something. And I said, yep, this thing came from Arizona, got parked in this driveway in Mississauga, and it hasn't moved in probably 13 to 15 years. Anyway, I finally got the story from the people that owned it, how this thing came to be. They were on vacation in Arizona when 9/11 happened. And if you remember your 9/11 history, the airplanes were all grounded, trains were packed, they were completely sold out, buses were sold out, you couldn't rent a car, all the car rentals were booked up. These people had to get back to Canada, and they had to get back fast. There was a bunch of them, so what did they do? They bought this RV and they drove it home. That's how they got home. They brought it home, parked it in their driveway, and it never turned another wheel from 9/11, which was I think 13 years from the time it was parked till the time I got there to look at it. So as you can imagine, it didn't run, it wouldn't start, it was totally dead. I took the gas caps off and gave a sniff, and it just about knocked me on my ass. It is just all skunky. But for $3,000, after I rolled around underneath it and looked at the condition of the undercarriage and realized that this thing only had 35,000 original miles on it, I said, hey man, look, I want this thing. So, but you got to let me do a couple of things. So all I wanted to do was get a battery in it, dump a little gas down the carburetor, and see if she would cough. Because on an engine that's been sitting for a long time, if the bottom end is bad, you'll hear it. When it first starts up, you'll hear that death rattle before it gets oil from the rods, and you don't want to mess with an engine like that. But anyway, I squirted a little gas down the carburetor, wound it over, and it started right up, quiet as a mouse, no smoke, no nothing. I said, sold, gave the man his money, $3,000, got a record, I picked the thing up and towed it up here to Uxbridge. And so the first week I had it, I dropped a couple of $1,000 on 7 tires 2 batteries, 2 gas tanks, 2 fuel pumps. This thing, it's got electric fuel pumps in the tanks. 86 is a changeover year between carburetors and fuel injection. So what they did, everything had a 6 psi fuel pump in the tank, and if it had fuel injection, it got the high pressure pump for the fuel injection added upstream of that. So this one, anyway, once I did that, I put the fuel tanks in it, put tires on it, put batteries in it, 1 chassis battery and 2 house batteries under the floor. I had to change them all. She started right up, ran good, and that was that. I took it out for a drive. I couldn't believe how gutless it was. It was terrible. So anyway, once we knew we had a good runner, we set the wheels in motion to make it ours. So the first thing I did, the mechanic in me again, it did not meet the minimum rate of acceleration, to quote my friend Karsten. The minimum acceptable rate of acceleration. I know it's a big thing and all that, but it's got a 460 cubic inch V8 engine. It should go when you hit the gas. So anyway, I took the engine all apart. I put an Edelbrock Performer camshaft in it. I put an Edelbrock aluminum Performer dual plane intake manifold on it. I left the carburetor on it. It's a Holley 4180. It's actually an Autolite 4180. It doesn't say Holley anywhere on it, but Holley made it for Ford. It's a 650 CFM vacuum secondary 4-barrel with a nice electric choke. Worked perfect. I just left it. So we did that. I put a set of Hooker long tube headers on it and 2.5-inch mandrel bent duals with a crossover pipe. And I'll tell you what, night and day. It's like I added a second engine. This thing's a rocket ship now. It'll pull anything. It pulls my car trailer. I got 5,000 pounds hanging off the back of this. So it weighs 11. So I'm 16K going down the road. And I got to look in the mirror to make sure the trailer's still there. So much power. And it gets the same mileage as it did before I modified it. You can't lose. I just basically followed the formula that Edelbrock provided. They said use this camshaft, use this intake manifold, put a good high flow exhaust on it, and it'll make 465 pound-feet of torque. And I'm telling you, I'm getting all of that. This thing downright hauls ass. The original C6 transmission is still in it. All I did was put a tow and go shift kit in it and a cast aluminum extra capacity oil pan. I've got a trans temperature gauge there on the dash. Never seen it go past 180. Other stuff that we did, I didn't like the idea of it having the alternator with the, if you're familiar with our RVs or plow trucks, it's got a battery isolator. So the alternator output goes to the center stud. There's 2 great big diodes on it. One goes to the chassis battery, the other goes to the house batteries. It's patchwork slipshod at best. So what I did is, there was a place in there on the engine. I mounted a second alternator. Just a 10SI GM alternator. It's 60 amps. All you need. So that second alternator is just for the house batteries. Now, I've got the isolator is still there. All the cables are still there. So if I, per se, lost one alternator or the other, I could hook it up in minutes so that my alternator that I still have will run the whole show through the isolator like it did before. Not everybody can do that because not every engine has the room for the second alternator, but this one did. So I did it. And works great. One problem I did have with it was when the engine would first start, the belt would shriek on the second alternator. Just the way that it had to get mounted. It's really hard to get it adjusted up tight. But anyway, what I found, all I had to do was put put a bit larger pulley on it. It just slowed it down a little bit. It still charges, but no more shrieking belt. The stuff you learn. Then, once we had the engine tranny sorted out, I got out on the road, and I noticed this thing getting blown. It would just get blown all over the place. It was terrible. Like you were like white knuckling it all the time. It's a big vehicle. It catches a lot of wind, right? You wouldn't want to take this thing over the Burlington Skyway on a windy day. Let's put it that way. So I started looking into that. Shock absorbers. It had these skinny little original factory shocks on it. So I looked up some shocks, and the shocks I looked up, I've always been a fan of Monroe gas magnums. They've always worked for me. So I went to order up a set of those, and then in the listing I saw Monroe gas magnum RV. I said, hey, what are these? So I checked them out. They're huge. The things are like this. They look like they're off a transport truck. So I said, that's the ones we want. So I ordered up 4 of those. We put those on it. The front suspension, the front end, of course, was all good and tight. The thing's only got 35,000 miles on it. But what I did was I took it apart, and if you're familiar with these Ford twin eye beams, it's got 2 on either side. They call them radius rods. So I took the rubber bushings out of those and swapped them with polyurethane. The front had a little rinky-dink sway bar on it. I was in the wreckers and I found an old Ford minibus with an aftermarket, a huge, like it was like 1 1/4 or something sway bar. I got that. I put that on the front of it. The rear, I got a rear sway bar. It seems once you get into the late 90s, the early 2000s, E350s and E450s come with a rear sway bar. So I got that. I put at the wreckers again. I put the whole rear sway bar setup on it. She was a tail dragger, this one. So I put a set of airlift, 5,000, 3,000, I don't know, airlift airbags in the back, and they're active. They're on leveling valves and everything. You don't just blow them up to what you want and go. So they'll always maintain the level that they're set at. That's why I've got the little air ride compressor running in the back. That pretty much explains everything underneath. As far as why I love the Holiday Rambler, I didn't know this until I was looking at RVs. We looked at a lot of them that were pretty baffed. You could tell that they had rot in the walls. These RVs are generally made of finger jointed 2x2s all stapled together, and then they put the outer skin and the inner skin and they let them go. So you get any water inside them and they just rot. Well, this thing, the key is on the door. The name of it, Alumilite XL. And after I'd gone to look at this thing the first time, I came home and I said, what is this, a Holiday Rambler Alumilite XL? That's when I found out. This thing, all the superstructure of the camper shell back there, it's all aluminum. It's all TIG welded together. Nothing can rot. It's got an aluminum skin on the outside. It's got an aluminum roof. This thing is made to last. They were a premium high-end unit when they were new. That's why you never see them. For 2 reasons you never see them for sale. Number 1, the people that have them won't sell them. Number 2, they were bloody expensive back then. That's why most people opted for the spruce gooses, right? With the finger jointed bodies. And lots of trouble with those. This thing, even if it leaks, can't hurt anything. The only thing that's really wood on it is the floor. And the only real soft spot I found on the floor in this one was right there inside the door, because it did have a little bit of a leak. Over the years, it ran down inside the wall and took out the floor there. I just patched it up with a piece of aluminum tread plate. It wasn't bad enough to justify tearing the whole floor apart. But that's the story of the Holiday Rambler. And this 1986 is the last year that Holiday Rambler was still a real Holiday Rambler. The Klingler family are the ones that started the Holiday Rambler company in the 60s. And in 1986, they sold it to Harley Davidson of all things. And then it's changed hands a couple of times since. Holiday Rambler, the name is still around. It's part of the REV group. But the original Holiday Ramblers, like this one, technically ended in 1986. So, I hope you've learned a little bit. I hope you like my camper. We're going to be doing a few jobs on it in the future. The outside of it, the bottom, you'll notice, was a darker color. That's factory, but they did a really crappy job. So we're going to clean that up. I want to repaint the bottom of the body, try and figure out what color it's supposed to be, and maybe tweak from there a little bit if we think there's something we'd like a little bit more. Another thing I'm going to do is the transmission. The old C6 is coming out, and I got an E4 OD, which is an electronically controlled 4-speed overdrive we're going to be putting in. I've got an aftermarket controller I'm going to mount into the dash to run it. Aside from that, this old girl is pretty much done. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. And if you've got any questions or comments, the place to do that is below. Hit the subscribe button. That's always great because the Claremont Classic Garage is a happening place, let me tell you. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.